this is a special message today because our worship team decided that we should ask the congregation what's on their minds, what's going on. And so we have been asking through emails and online social media for folks to say, what are your questions for us, the two of us, and that we'll be in dialogue about those questions. And so we have some that we've sort of chosen and brought some together from the online questions. So thank you to everybody who's offered these questions, and we're going to do our best to answer as many as we can. If we don't get through them all, we'll answer more in the second service, and we'll also answer them. We'll try to answer them. We'll write about them, and maybe we'll do some sermons and messages about some of these questions. So thank you. Great, brilliant questions. And Randy and I bring a lot of different things to the table, so hopefully that'll show up as we answer. We have not talked about this to prepare, other than just to say that, these are the questions we're going to talk about, but I have no idea what Randy's about to say, nor does he have any idea what I'm about to say.
I don't know what I'm going to say.
And Lee Rumley is going to ask your questions to us as we go along and keep us on track, hopefully.
Here's our first question. What religion were you raised, and how did it impact your sense of identity, both positively and negatively?
Well, I was raised Baptist and Pentecostal, so Baptist-costal. How was it impacted? Yes, so, I would just tell you that, early on, that religion was really central to my faith and upbringing. I had a really difficult life, and so a lot of struggles, a lot of death, a lot of tragedy, and religion, even the Baptist and Pentecostal faith, was really foundational for me. It was a place of safety where I sought relief from that serious pain that I was enduring. My whole family did. We all went to church, and it was just really foundational for us. So I say that as my seed. I like to call myself the first ever Unibaptist-costal. You may have heard me say that. Is because I believe all of those, my faith is in me, is part of my journey and what led me here. So in some ways it was really restrictive. So in other ways I just talked about how open it was for my healing, but it was really suppressive in one way when I talk about my identity as a gay man. I knew I had struggles, or shall I say, desires and stuff like that, but I didn't know where to navigate those or talk about those. Religion, in my former religions, they didn't allow me space. Now that was the one area that was taboo and untouchable. And so it was always in the dark. It took me coming here, or shall I say, in a more progressive faith, to where I really came out. As a matter of fact, it was here. Marlin asked the first time. Now, I had been in higher dimensions for a number of years in my previous Pentecostal and Baptist traditions, and no one ever asked if me and my partner was together. It was Marlin the first time here. He said, "Hey, are you two together?" And it was like, what the? Somebody actually asked? And then I said, yes. And I like to say this. I'm going to share this. This is off topic, but I would like to share this. But I had left the ministry. I had left faith because I had this huge crisis. And it was Marlin in that moment, because he said something else that just healed me. He said, "I heard you were a Baptist minister. Would you consider coming and joining our staff?" And that was my calling, folks. He gave me my calling to return to ministry. And I have been coming out ever since.
All right. I love it. I love it. That's awesome. That's great to hear. And I want to say, my father was raised Jewish. My mother was raised Catholic in the 50s and 40s and 50s. And they, when they were married, 1959, they decided to look for a way to bring up their children that would be both respectful of their my father's Jewish heritage and my mother's Christian heritage, and something that they could find as common ground. Neither one wanted to convert to the other's religion, and the Unitarian Universalist Church just fit the bill, and they were really happy that we'd be raised and get these positive messages about both traditions, and also learn about the world's religions, and learn about Native American spirituality in Sunday school, and learn about science and evolution. And it just seemed like a perfect fit for my parents and for me and my brother. And so that was really significant for me. And I remember my coming of age ceremony and some of the stuff I talked about earlier, just how significant that was to be in an intergenerational community. I remember some of my father's friends coming up to me and saying, I really appreciated what you said in your coming of age speech, that it really, it spoke to me. And that had just such a big impact on me at 14 years old, that these men, especially in that moment for me, were affirming who I was. So that idea of being in an intergenerational community of values that's open just meant everything. And I think that the biggest impact it's had on me is over the last 20 years. So the second half of my life has been, I was born in 1968. And so really the last, going through the 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, it was still the old America where all of our education was pretty much teaching us about, white men, how white men had created everything, and it seemed like, and how the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, all had a great party together and all loved each other, and that's how this country started. So that was how I was raised through grade school and into high school. But then we started to have some more real conversations as a culture. And I think for me to be part of a Unitarian Universalist church, as we were starting to talk about, racial equality, gender equality, and certainly LGBT equality, to be in this nurturing environment so that I could learn and grow and be held through all that, it's been really important to me. On the negative side, I would just say that I think there's two. One thing is that there is a potential in Unitarian Universalism for us to gain a sense of superiority or arrogance. There's a sense like, oh, these other people don't do religion right, and we know, we understand it better than they do. And I think I grew up with a lot of that. And so I've really tried in my ministries to not send those messages, to really affirm there's many ways to do religion. There's many thoughtful, beautiful people and religiosity happening in so many different traditions. So I honor many ways of being faithful. I just feel like this is the way for me and my family that works, where I feel at home. And so I'm glad to be here.
Thank you.
Did you change religious perspectives since your childhood faith? And if so, how did that change your sense of self?
So after I graduated high school and went off to college, I sort of stopped going to church. It was something we did every Sunday with my family growing up. But after that, I stopped going, and then I traveled. I lived in Japan for 2 years, and I studied Zen Buddhism, and I actually studied the Japanese tea ceremony pretty intensively while I was there. And that's all based in Zen and Japanese philosophy and arts. And so I really was influenced by Eastern religions. And then I traveled through Asia for 4 years, and I spent, after 2 years living there and then 2 years traveling there, and I studied Hinduism and all of those traditions. What I learned was, it actually not only learned a lot about spirituality and spiritual practices, but it also, for the first time, I started to realize I actually gained an appreciation for Jesus through the Buddhists and the Hindus, all of whom recognize Jesus as a spiritual teacher and leader. So as I was learning about Jesus through them, I realized, a lot of the notions I had about Christianity, the Bible, and Jesus from growing up there was a lot of sort of misunderstandings about the literal ideas of the Bible. And all of a sudden I was hearing Buddhists interpret biblical stories, and I'm thinking, wow, that's really interesting. So that got me to go back and look at Christianity from a new lens. And I think that was the biggest impact for me of having kind of, in some ways, left Unitarian. I didn't formally leave it, but having moved away, learned about other faiths, and then coming back, I really had a new appreciation that this is a place where I could bring all of that learning from Buddhism and Hinduism in Japan into my ministry and into my life and my spirituality. So I was really glad to be able to come back and land here.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Anything?
The only thing I'll say is that that I've recognized that my acceptance in UU circles sometimes means rejection, my rejection in other circles. Mm. And that has been a real big discovery for me, is that yeah.
All right, Lee?
In most religions, women have been relegated to a lower status, instructed by their leaders to listen to the guidance from males. As males, please talk to All Souls members about equality of females in UU ministry. How do you view the spirituality of the divine feminine?
Wow. Well, from my culture, women were the backbone of my family, the church, just about every part of my experience growing up. I mean, my dad and grandparents, the men weren't there. And this is the case in many, not all, but in many instances within the black family. So the caring, the concern, the compassion that you think the attributes of God, that was mama, and that was grandma. So they were God, you know. So I had that perspective about how women and the place they hold in my life. And I've come into this movement and seen a lot of women in authority, women in high places, women preachers, ministers, and so I still connect that with my upbringing. And women are just God, period.
All right. All right. Beautiful. So it's kind of a two-part question. And I think just to answer the question about in Unitarian Universalist ministry, it was a similar trajectory from a lot of faiths in terms of patriarchy and stuff. It took a while I think we're ahead of the curve around a lot of our openness on different issues, but there's still a lot, even today, I think, still a lot of work that we need to do. But I will tell you that the first woman ordained by a denomination in the United States of America was Olympia Brown, who was ordained by the Universalist Church of America. So we have that going for us. And today we have more female ministers than male ministers in the Unitarian Universalist clergy.
Yeah.
And now I just want to circle back to the divine feminine, because we talked about that. I mean, that's part of the question. The divine feminine, so, you know, for me, my understanding of it was that before Christianity became a dominant religion, women and God was often portrayed as female, and the goddess was a major expression of spirituality, which makes sense, right? Because if the giving of birth, the creation of life being female, that just makes a lot more sense in terms of a metaphor. Christianity came in and brought a lot of patriarchy and snuffed out a lot of the goddess worship and feminine, divine feminine spirituality. Islam continued that trend around the world. And so, you know, for me, I really appreciated in the Hindu tradition how much the divine feminine is a part. Goddesses are all over the place in India and worshipped and venerated. So I got to experience that, which was really meaningful for me. And then, you know, for me, the idea of Mary in the Christian tradition, because it's always been confusing that, you know, the creation came through a father and a son. And so I really have found that some of the worship of Mary and some of the traditions around Mary within Catholicism in particular have been really meaningful. As a parent who's lost a child, who's had a child die, Mary and her spirituality, her, you know, holding her dead son and making sense of her life after Jesus died, you know, for me has been very instrumental. As a matter of fact, I'd love to read. I have a poem that I carry around the divine feminine and around Mary that's been really important to me. And I've read it here once or twice around Christmas time, the birth of Jesus, because it really kind of balances out. This is from an Episcopal priest named Reverend Alla Renee Bozarth. And she wrote this poem to demonstrate how Christian liturgy might evolve to better honor the sacred role of Mary alongside Jesus. And so here's what she wrote. Before Jesus was his mother. Before supper in the upper room, there was breakfast in the barn. Before the Passover feast, a feeding trough. And before the altars of earth, fair linens of hay and seed. Before his cry, her cry. Before his sweat of blood, her bleeding and tears. Before his offering, hers. Before the breaking of bread and death, the breaking of her body in birth. Before the offering of the cup, the offering of her breast. Before his blood, her blood. And by her body and blood alone, his body and blood and whole human being. The wise men knelt to hear the woman's word in wonder, holding up her sacred child, her God in the form of a babe. She said, "Receive and let your heart be healed and your lives be filled with love, for this is my body, this is my blood."
Beautiful. Thank you.
So I think the divine feminine is hopefully making a comeback in world religions, but it's certainly, I think, as women become more prominent in our society, I hope women will become more prominent in religion across our culture as well. And case in point, I know I'm going on a little long on this, but I think it's important. When you think, regardless of what you think politically about Nancy Pelosi, many people have said on both sides of the aisle, she's the best Speaker of the House we have ever had. Now, again, I'm not making a political point here. I'm making a point that for how many generations and how many centuries did we not allow women to take that kind of political leadership in our country? And then as soon as we do, she becomes the best we've ever had. And I think that I'm hoping that her example is a corrective to our culture to realize we need to recognize that women are phenomenal leaders and that we need to make sure that we make space, because if we're not, we're missing out on 50% at least of all of our great leaders.
Yes. I totally agree. Yes.
This topic was directed for Randy. I would like to know if Randy ever struggles with suffering or feeling stuck while ministering to white folks, and how does he handle that experience, if so?
Okay, well, ministering to white folks. Wow. So as a minister, I mean, it's almost something that I don't experience when I show up. When I was a chaplain for many years at the VA, and I show up in a room, I can't see color. That would undermine my entire ministry, right? So I have to be there for all people, and I've always saw that I'm connected by their struggle. I'm connected by their story. And I'm connected by what they're going through in that moment because I can relate. So I haven't had a problem ministering with or to white people. I will say just one thing. I struggle sometimes when white people invalidate my experience. And that is difficult for me. But I'm learning, even when they are invalidating, or when people invalidate my experience while I'm trying to minister to them, is that it's still not about me. It's about doing the healing work that I'm called to do. So
Well, that's deep what you said. I'm just curious, do you by any chance have an example that we might be able to understand of somebody invalidating you?
Well, I hear it all on the news all the time.
Right.
You know, that didn't happen. I'm like, well, yeah, it did. But I mean, I'll just give one. I mean, there's been a time when I said something and I'm like, this person was being racist. And he said, I don't think they were. And I got angry with him because he didn't validate what I was feeling. But then as I started thinking about that was my story. And it could have been truth, but it may not have been. And he didn't see it like that, and I did. Now, in that instance, we had a big discussion about it since then, and he could have validated what I was feeling. We came to this conclusion that he could have validated what I was feeling, but not necessarily affirm what I said. But I'm in a relationship with the white person, so we have a lot of those conversations.
That makes sense.
And what about you?
I don't mind. I have an easy time ministering to white people, but actually, I mean, sometimes it's a struggle when we do bring up, race and other things, and white people are wrestling with that. It can be, I can struggle with my patience. I mean, I think this congregation has probably felt that over the years at times when, I'm trying to say we need to move forward on this issue around race or even sexual orientation or other things, and people are not going with me as fast as I would like them to, and I have found that to be frustrating at times. But I will say on the flip side, when New Dimensions came, and Bishop Pearson and you all started joining us, and Pastor Smith, that I can remember, preaching to the contemporary service. It took me time to figure out how to find my voice in that setting, because I think I did, I would try to preach like a black preacher or something like that, and trying to find how do I keep it interesting? I want to get people to say amen to me too, so I'm like, do I need to work with a rhythm, or what do I have to do to make this happen? So I had to kind of relearn how to speak a little bit, in the context of black preacher. But I think the funniest example I have of all this was one Sunday morning early on, when at the height of we used to have, for those who weren't, we used to have a third service, which was a contemporary service, which combined these two communities for about 10 years. And it was really high energy, with praise singing, and it was just an amazing service, and a very different kind of feel than I was used to, having been raised Unitarian Universalist. But I remember one Sunday when I was speaking, and Pastor David and the New Dimensions chorale were singing, and then the chorale went to sit down in the front pew, but David was still playing, and then they started singing again from the pews, and other people were singing, and I was standing here, and Randy was right there, and I was about to get in the pulpit, and Randy grabbed my jacket and just said, hold on, it's not, don't go in yet. And I'm like, and he was just a student intern or whatever at that time. And I was like, okay, all right. And then I'm waiting, another minute, and I'm thinking, okay. And I look over at him, and he goes, no, not yet. And I'm like, what? And then all of a sudden, I'm waiting. I'm thinking, what am I waiting for? And then he goes, okay, now. And I was like, what did he hear in the music and what David was doing? So it took a while for my ear and my heart and everything to catch up to what was actually going on in that music, and what was happening in the room and the space, which was different from me. So I didn't have all the cues or the cultural understanding to really know that folks were having a moment and there was something going on, and I needed to wait till David sort of recognized it and shifted it before it would have felt good to get in the pulpit. Otherwise, I would have been interrupting something. But it was like I'm like, what was going on? I had no idea. So it's been a great learning and journey.
A number of people have questions about transgender issues, such as use of pronouns, medical care for children and youth, and regarding sports. Could you all speak to that?
So that's a great question, and it's, we see it happening all the time, even the Olympics, people were interjecting the issues into the Olympics and other things. So and obviously we can't give a long dissertation. That would be a whole message in and of itself. But so I want to just give a sense of how I orient myself to these questions to the degree that it'll be helpful to you. I think of two things. One was around pronouns. I remember my father, who's 88 years old, 5-6 years ago when more people were using pronouns, stating their pronouns and things like that. And my father is a cisgendered, straight male. From a different generation, and he had the opportunity, because he's a hospice volunteer. He was volunteering with someone who was transgender, identified as transgender, and that person explained, he really was impacted by that relationship, and he said this to me, and I thought it was really worth passing on. He said, I learned that, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable sometimes for me to say my gender pronouns or to ask somebody theirs, because I don't know how they're going to react, and it just seems different from how I've been throughout my life. He said, but what I realized was that my friend here, and anyone whose gender might be different from the what we consider have been considered norm for so long, they go through a lot of discomfort all the time. And so if I could just for me, it's like 15, 20 seconds of discomfort. And he said, I'm certainly willing to be uncomfortable for 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds in a relationship to talk about gender pronouns if it's going to help make that person's life even a little bit more comfortable and that person feel more included. And so I just thought the graciousness of that was really important, and it helped me, and I wanted to share that because I think it's true. For those of us who are what we call cisgendered, right, who continue to live with the gender that we were assigned at birth, and that we tend to feel more comfortable in the world. And there's high rates of addiction, high rates of suicide and things like that in the transgender community, or genderqueer community, non-binary, because of how society treats folks. And so I think anything that we can do to make folks' lives feel more included is worthwhile. So gender pronouns, that's an easy one. I don't know the answer to sports. I need to do more research to understand all of what it's about. But what I do know is sports was incredibly important to me growing up. I was very involved in sports. Some of my relationships with coaches, teams, individual challenges that it put me through. And I know I want that for every child who's interested in doing sports. So whatever we have to figure out to make it work, I want to make sure that sports is something that every child, every young person, every adult is able to participate in if that's what they want to. And I hope we can stay in an open conversation and figure out what's going to make the most sense going forward. That's my best thought, on those two things. And then the other thing I'll just say about gender reassignment surgeries and hormones and things, especially with young people who are not of age themselves. I know that's really controversial, and what I think about that is that I don't have a child who's transgender or non-binary, and I'm not a doctor, so I really don't know what's best, and so I don't feel like I'm the one who should be deciding for these families what to do. I think that it's up to the parents, the child, and their doctors to figure out what's best.
So when Dimitri and I were in Raleigh, we started a LGBTQ plus meetup group. And when we first started, people started attending, and there was this one awkward-looking guy. He had a bunch of tattoos, he had blue hair, but he was really shy and withdrawn. And we'd have another social event, and he'd come back again, and we'd have another one, he'd come again, and he was still shy and awkward, but as he started attending more of those meetings, he started opening up. And then we noticed him starting to wear a little bit more feminine dress. And then it was about a month or two later that he came fully in makeup, dress, and he was talking about transitioning, or now she was talking about transitioning. And she became a central part of our group. And we'd go out to places, and we know that people would be looking at her, and we were like standing guard. Like, if you say anything with her, you're gonna have to speak to all of us. We were ready to fight because we loved her so much. But she said something, and I read it. She said something just here a few days on Facebook that just really spoke volumes to me and Dee, and we had a conversation around it. Someone was disappointed with the group. Since we left, things have changed. But someone was disappointed with the group, and they left the group, and they were saying, this group, da. She said, she honored them. She said, I'm sorry that you feel this way, but let me tell you, this group saved my life. And it still just is heartbreaking. I mean, it just touches my heartstrings. And she said, this group changed my life. And she wrote a lot of stuff about how there was no community that had surrounded her. And we did. And the reason why I brought this up is because I'm thinking we are that community here too. Because I had been a part of the LGBT community for years, but it was only here that I came out. A few years ago across this pulpit because it was the community that supported me and surrounded me and made me feel safe. So all the dialogue about pronouns and sports seems like a ruse to what's really going on in people's lives. And I want to encourage us to create a space just for people to be. And to be free and to surround them in love and let them be the best that they can be. And so I think this is what this community allows or creates, and that's what we created for that individual in Raleigh. So that's all I have to say about the matter.
What are your favorite approaches to combat racist, homophobic, transphobic talking points?
Well, you may weigh in on that one.
Jump in.
Well, and I've been preaching this, if you guys, or sharing it in my messages for the last few messages, is about dialogue and knowing that when that stuff happens, when we hear it, we see it, it's usually someone talking through their pain, through their anger, and if we can, if we're able to see their humanity through the midst of that, and try to find some common ground, some commonality to share our hearts, maybe we can get down to the main part of what's really going on. I wouldn't tell you to avoid that. I mean, for self-care, you might want to get yourself out of the situation or excuse yourself. But I would encourage all of us to find a way to stay in dialogue with people. That's what I've been sharing. It's what Marlin, we've been talking about. How do we stay at the table? And how do we change the homophobe? That's the bigger. How do we change the transphobe? How do we change them? Well, I guarantee you it'll have to start with some dialogue.
Yeah, I think that for me, it goes back to this idea that I think that the most change that I've had is true. It's through dialogue. It's through meeting people who are different from me. And then it's like, I care about that person. So it's not an abstract issue. It's the person. But I think as terms of strategies, for me, I think the biggest impact on me, besides being in a relationship with someone different from me, which is always impactful, it's actually seeing modeled people who are like me, who are open on these issues and who speak openly on the issues. Then I say, oh, I see how I can do that. And I want to be like that person. So as I would identify, or this culture would identify me, and I would identify myself as white, straight, cisgendered male. So when I see a person who's like me, looks like me, or who I identify with in that way, speaking really openly about LGBT, is affirming about LGBT, or about race issues, or about transgender, any of those things, I find, or women, standing up for men, standing up for women, then I go, yeah, that's who I want to be in the world. That's how I want to show up in these conversations. That's had a big impact on me. So now I try to be that kind of person when I have the opportunity to speak, both in public, but also in private conversations as well.
Yeah. And I think
that's my strategy.
Just to touch upon that, when you're in conversation, to have the person that's using that homophobic language to explore how, in essence, ask them, how do you think a person hearing what you're saying might feel or interpret what you're saying? So ask them to unpack what they're saying and to connect the impact of what they're saying to someone's life. So,
Oh, I got one more.
yes.
You just made me think of that. So, but it's also for me is being open and accepting and non-judgmental to people who, when I am speaking to them, because I think there's too many people who I see, particularly in progressive circles, who it's like they just assume everybody has to, have the right, check all the boxes on I'm, super feminist and I'm LGBT friendly and I'm all those things. But how does somebody get there? And so for me, I recognize that there's a lot of people, because it took me a while to learn and have experiences to get there where I could feel as open as I am today. And so what I realize is there are a lot of people who maybe have legitimate questions that they're wrestling with about equality in different ways. And I think it's really important for me to be able to listen and accept the person and have the conversation, because nobody wants to just be told, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be, and you can't be a member of All Souls unless you're completely, woke on all these issues. I think that'd be great if we could all agree completely and we could all be in the same place, but it's a journey. And so I always want to make this a place, and I've said to people from the pulpit here that if you're struggling with trying to figure out this transgender in sports or these pronouns or this, whatever the issue is, it feels like race has, been flipped on its head, it's reverse racism. If you're having those questions, I don't want to delegitimize your question or your struggle. And I want to be a safe place and a safe person for you to be able to voice it and then begin to, as Randy was saying, say, oh yeah, okay, and then begin to think deeper about it. So that's what I'd like us all to do as a community, is be a safe place where, because otherwise people have to show up here, they have to go learn all this stuff and open their hearts completely before they even show up. Well, where's that supposed to happen? And then they walk in our door. So I want us to be a place where people's hearts can open and they can become more inclusive. But that requires us to be willing to accept people where they are and hopefully stay in dialogue so that they can grow with us.
Mm-hmm.